Okay.
Welcome, everyone, to the Kepler College live stream. Hopefully, we're going live this time. We'll see. Fantastic. I think we're here.
Mhm.
So, welcome,
Yes,
everyone,
it's
to the
been-
Kepler College live stream. We have Juliet Sharman Burke in the studio live, and we are about to discuss The Mythic Journey, the book that Juliet co-wrote with Liz Greene, both titans in the field of astrology and psychological astrology in particular. Welcome, Juliet. I'm so thrilled to have you here. As we have been talking off camera or off live stream, this book is a compendium of myths from around the world with that are retold and then have a psychological analysis of them afterwards that show how they relate to the modern psyche and how people can incorporate sort of the medicine of them and apply them to their lives. And we were discussing how many of these myths that you wrote about with Liz, and just as a background for listeners about who you are a practicing psychotherapist who incorporates astrology into your consultations. And you have written many books on the tarot, so you are very comfortable and familiar with symbolism and how it relates to human psychology. You've also written a few other books with Liz, which we will touch on. One of them being a text that's used for the Kepler College Consulting Skills class. Um, we were talking about this book in particular, The Mythic Journey, about how extreme some of the symbolism in these myths are, and but how relevant they still are to today's modern world. And so thank you for joining us, and
Thank you
let's
for having
let's
me.
get it started. So, in the introduction, you point out that in ancient Hindu medicine, when someone with a mental or emotional difficulty consults a doctor, the physician prescribed a story on which to meditate, and thus helping the patient to find his or her own solution to the problem. And this, I thought, was an amazing s- point to start the discussion on because it's the power of myth, which people have discussed prior, but how it can affect a psychological, alchemical change in a person to reflect on. Was that one of the primary
Yeah,
reasons for creating this book?
it was indeed. The um, When we started writing, the book that inspired me through that was The Uses of Enchantment by Bruno Bettelheim, and a psychoanalyst. And he wrote a book about the uses of fairy tales. He called it The Uses of Enchantment, but it was about fairy tales for children. And he quoted there about the Hindu doctors giving a myth or a story or a fairy story for the psychologically disturbed, worried to meditate on. And he gave lots of examples about children's stories and how important it was for them to have really good, um, meaty stories like the Grimm's fairy tales to think about, because as he says, children need, um, real good stories to think about, and it helps them solve their problems even unconsciously. And I was really fascinated by that. And Liz and I were talking about it, and we were talking about mythology and how we've used it. We were already using it a lot in our astrological work, and understanding the planetary symbols, the gods and goddesses, and all their, their aspects through mythology gave everything so much more importance. And then we started to look through stories and myths, and we thought we'd stick to myths, not fairy tales, but because a lot of fairy tales are already watered down myths, but they usually have
Mhm.
some sort of a, not exact, well, maybe a moral, ending, but they have a kind of a purpose to them. particularly with a fairy tale, you kind of see how the whole thing works out, and it's usually when you do the right thing. um, usually when you break bread with a stranger, you get a golden goose. When you're too mean to share your bread, you get your leg chopped off. Those those are
Right.
the sort of, the either or.
Harsh realities, right? And that, and it brings me back to the point of they seem very intensely exaggerated. Like the book starts out with some Greek myths that have some really gruesome, I mean, as everyone is who is familiar with Greek mythology, like everybody's doing bad things to everybody else. Like it's a very intense, brutal, and gruesome narrative frequently, and with curses passed down through families. And why do you think that intensity is there? Is it because the psyche needs sort of that much grist to mill?
I think it's probably because that's what actually happens. I think when we have unresolved issues and things that don't get resolved in ourselves in the present, they're undigested and they just get passed on. I mean, if you look at, things like Succession, for example, that the TV drama that's been very um, well known lately. There's this feeling that if it doesn't get sorted out in one generation, it moves on to the next generation and then the next generation. So I think these things, although they don't necessarily involve literally cooking and eating children as they do in Greek myth, what they do to their children is pretty grim, actually. And if you look at, actually, you just look at history, you look at the particularly the medieval history, it's pretty brutal. We do some
Indeed.
pretty awful
No,
things.
the present, the news right now is pretty brutal, as well as what children are suffering worldwide. I don't think
Children are
anybody would
suffering.
argue with that.
What people are doing to each other, how they're just generally. I mean, it comes down to very, very badly behaved. And in myth, when you're badly behaved, you get very badly punished. There really
It
isn't.
seems like, no, we're not learning our lesson, though. We keep returning to the same narrative over and over again.
Yeah.
What so do you use myth? Will you use it in your consultation practice to
I do, if it's relevant, because quite often when you get very familiar with myth and story and perhaps just this language, it becomes very easy to be able to sort of just pull out various strands that you can use to explain to somebody what they're actually doing. For example, a really obvious thing is Cinderella. The old-fashioned Cinderella story. She doesn't get to go to the ball. She ends up making her own dress and going to the ball on her own. And when she runs away, she actually runs away from the prince. She doesn't just get swept up by him. She runs away because she's not sure about him, and he catches her shoe on the step. And then when he comes round to try and find the shoe that fits the girl, he meets her two stepsisters first. And the stepmother says to the first girl, cut off your toe and stick it in the shoe. It doesn't matter if you can't walk as long as you're queen. And of course, she gets found out. And then she says to the second sister, cut off your heel if you can't get your foot in the shoe. It doesn't matter if you can't walk as long as you're queen. And then, of course, the shoe fits Cinderella and then they marry and da da da. But it's that sort of, there's a whole brutal side to the Cinderella story, but if it fits you, you've got to be true to yourself. Cinderella doesn't wait for a fairy godmother to just wave a wand. And it doesn't all disappear at midnight. She runs away from the prince herself. It's a very autonomous Cinderella. And I think those are the things that are actually quite, you suddenly think, I can do this. I don't, just because I've been told I can't go. So I don't just sit and cry. I get on with it, and I don't expect somebody to give me loads of money and cover me in glory, and then I can go to the board. That's such a kind of a shallow perspective, isn't it? And
Mhm.
sometimes that comes up, or there are loads of times when you just suddenly find a particular story that you think, gosh, that really fits um, where a person is if they're feeling trapped and downtrodden and my luck is so awful and why me. There's a sort of another narrative, and I think when you put it in a story form, it's much more acceptable.
Hmm. Yeah. And for some reason, people can metabolize it, can take it in, and it becomes an embodied sort of visceral experience, and the revelations about their personal life can are somehow facilitated in a way that, a rational discussion can't achieve the same goals, right? Or help that person come into consciousness for whatever reason. I think art, whether it be storytelling or images, have that direct line to speak to the unconscious,
Yeah.
maybe, and more so than the conscious mind.
Well, I think that's why
And
it's so important to start with children and start telling children, the good stories and not change them around and not make them all Disneyfied and, mess about with them, but actually give the old fashioned stories because children can take it and they need to know that actually, um, if the little pig doesn't bother to make his house out of sticks and, only makes his house out of sticks and straw because it's quick, then the wolf will come. And the little pig who doesn't, who takes a long time and works hard, he's safe. So, but in the modern day stories, they say, oh well, one little pig went to the other brother and he let him in, and they were all, then nobody got eaten by the wolf, and and then they invited the wolf in for a cup of tea, and you're sort of thinking, no, 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 it doesn't work like that. If you do it properly, you can rely on it, and it's if you're slipshod about it, then yeah, the flat house is going to fall down and you're going to be in trouble. So I think those are the kind of messages, and I think they come through. When you start delving into myth, you suddenly start seeing these motifs which continue to repeat themselves, I think.
yes, indeed. And the book is separated into sections that I think are pretty amazing because they get to the kernel of sort of the human existential experience. What are the main universal motifs, and divides the myths up according to that. And so that was obviously a conscious decision. And which came first? Did you collect the myths, or did you determine the themes, the existential themes, and then match the myths, or did it sort of happen organically
Well, it was
together?
very organic, actually, to be honest. It was a long time ago that it was first written, and it's been republished recently. Um, but in the beginning, we thought it if you can use myth as a guide, you have to sort of go through the stages of life. So you've got parents and children, siblings, families, family inheritances, and then leaving home, and then finding a career, and then love, and all the sort of things, all the archetypal stages of life, really, all the way through to death. So we actually chopped it up as a life, as a story of life. And then we put in myths that felt particularly pertinent to those stages of life. Some easier than others, and some with kind of guides to how you can actually get best out of the stories, um, and even think about the way the characters in the stories behave, and how you can model something on that. So I
Hmm.
think those were
And who
that's
who was successful, who was not?
yeah. And yeah, exactly. And things like
What strategies did the successful ones employ, and how can you use those same ones in our modern life?
yeah.
Um, there was an African one that I thought was really interesting about the two brothers and trying and visiting the foreign lands, the foreign people on the mountain, and showing there's always that character, it seems, the sort of the gatekeeper, the wise one who asks for some assistance, right? And that's always the litmus test, like how you react, or how the characters react compassionately or not to someone who asks them for help. that seems to be a universal aspect to many of these myths.
I think
And
so. And
and
I also, yeah, I think that that's actually a very important thing. The way that you treat people with respect, with kindness, with generosity, that's the one that gives you the, like in Grimm's fairy tales, the strawberries in winter or the golden goose. Just by treating a little funny little man who looks like nobody, by sharing your food and drink, or like the brothers, helping the old lady. It's just by being, basically by actually being kind and generous. This gets you everywhere. But that
I mean, it
seems,
seems like an easy lesson, but unfortunately, that doesn't transfer over frequently in our modern life. But and it grants a certain wisdom too, like
well,
um,
you learn the secrets of the universe or whatever. But I suppose you're, it's it has to come from a very good. I suppose it's coming from an authentic place, and it's the get rich quick modern era that we're very consumed by, the consumerism of just thinking that money will solve everything, and as long as we can be rich and famous and beautiful, nothing can go wrong. And
and that is the narrative. It's sort of like the anti-myth that we're living right now. The Kardashians, the current regime, without getting too political, we were talking about the story of King Midas and how relevant that myth is in our current times.
yeah,
That, like, it kind of boggles me that that's not even a lot of, you incorporate a lot of myths from the Bible too, or stories from the Bible, and that have this mythical import.
mm.
Samson, the story of Samson.
Cain and
So
Abel.
even like people who claim to be very religious,
Mm.
it sort of boggles my mind how they're not getting out of their own stories what it seems to be the intention, maybe.
Well, I suppose I do wonder really whether or not children or people, I suppose it always comes down to education, doesn't it? Are they actually told parables, or do they learn stories from the Bible? Do they know the story of Cain and Abel? Um, and do parents know the stories of different, how to bring up children? When you offset one child against another, and we did have a bit of a laugh about Cain and Abel when we were looking at that story, because we thought actually God's quite unfair, because he prefers, when he says to Cain and Abel, bring me the best of your from what you've your land. um, Cain is a corn farmer. He's arable, if you like, and Abel has lamb, and obviously God seems to prefer lamb because he
Prefer
chooses.
land. Yeah, the deck is stacked, right? Like it's a rigged game.
It's sort of a rigged theme, but then we were thinking about how that resolves into parents and children. When your child echoes something that you like, so you're a mathematician and your child likes maths, but the other child likes dancing, you tend not to credit the dancer because you're not interested in it, and so they feel very jealous, and then there's a rivalry that gets set up, and obviously they don't have to kill each other, but you can look at nurseries and you can certainly see quite a lot of um,
Oh, yeah, aggressive behavior.
yeah,
Right?
you can
And
see it going on,
driven by rage and jealousy, right? Like the very
which
primal
it's a very
emotions.
primal experience. And so, I think those stories, they sort of, they tell you how it feels, not necessarily what actually happens, but how it feels when you've got one parent who prefers one child over another, or who gives more emphasis to one child. And I think in the beginning, I think Achilles, his mother Thetis, has always got a slight problem with her being a goddess. She's got a bit of a problem with her mortal husband. And so she wants her son to be, better. And you can see that in families where somebody feels they've married beneath them. And
Hmm.
so, you can, so these themes, they're all sort of there, but they're in quite mythic form. But if you start digging into them, you can say, yeah, actually, that's really quite relevant to lots of ordinary families where, you know, how you bring children up is depending on the relationship with the parents. I mean, all of this stuff is in myth. And
And it's all embedded in the human experience. That's why it's so universal, right?
well, I
Like
mean,
even that
pers-
myths from thousands of years ago are still so relevant today. It's pretty amazing to read the book and be like, oh, yeah, not too much has
nothing has
changed.
changed really. No.
So I'm curious about the astrology, like with myth and astrology, obviously they're intertwined. Like all of our symbols in astrology are derived from myths. Do you find that when you use astrology in your consultation practice, like people are always asking me, well, what does that mean? We try to avoid astrology jargon that even that the myths are a way to communicate that the code, the symbolism that astrologers are really good at like speaking their secret language to each other that nobody else understands unless you're have been studying astrology. Like are there myths that you use to help convey the astrology that you see, like maybe transits that
Um,
clients are going through?
I think it's quite difficult to pin one particular thing, but I think when you know the myths of the planets, you start getting to know the planets quite well. So you start seeing their shadow, their dark side, and their. So you see Aphrodite, you see Venus, and you see the goddess of love and beauty, but you also see that she's pretty jealous and pretty vain. And yes, she seduces people, and yes, she brings beauty and charm and grace, but she can also bring quite a lot of trouble. And Mars can bring war and battle and fight, but he can also bring bravery and courage. And so when you look at the two sides of, when you look at the actual mythic characters, you start to get a feeling of the planets as almost people. And so you see and you look at Hermes, Mercury, he's always messing about with some, getting involved in some story or another and pulling it around. And you think that's Mercury. He's always connecting dots and putting people in different places in order for things to happen. And so when you start getting to really feel those characters through the planets, I think it's just really helps your astrology, because rather than having a load of keywords, you've got lots of um, live live
Live
characters.
action, yeah. Well, like as astrologers, it's the same way. Like the myths become internalized, and you have a deeper, more enriched appreciation for the symbolism
Yeah.
and how it applies to the real human experience
I mean,
rather
I think
than.
that myth is really, it's really just the initial, the original psychology. I mean, obviously Jung, um, made myth and psychology very, very popular. But even before that, it was, how people think is very mythic.
Hmm. Indeed. And I invite any of our viewers to pop any comments into the chat that they might have or questions for Juliet. And this is my first time doing this, so if I don't see them, then maybe that's on my end. But we are here for a live Q&A discussion as part of the Kepler College book club, so I invite you to drop any questions into the chat. Do you have any particular myth that you really like? It's one of your favorites, or any of these stories in the book that you're really resonated with more than others?
Well, I guess obviously all of them, but some of them I particularly like. And I do really I quite like the Arthurian myths, the ones about Merlin, and Merlin being enchanted, falling in love, even though he's the wisest man in the world and he knows everything about everything, he still gets tripped up by love. But then the girl who trips him up, we have a story about her later in the book, Nineveh, and her transformation. And I always really liked that story because it sort of reminds you of the bleakness when you get what you want, when you get all the power and all the the things that you thought were going to really, really make you feel great. You discover that actually it's not quite like that. And actually, what really matters, mostly what really matters in the world, is relationships, good relationships. And actually, that it sounds so cliched in a way, but actually, that's where what really makes us happy is contentment and joy in our world, and that's the people around us. And if they're okay and we're okay with them, then it doesn't matter. So I mean, that's of course the Midas story as well. Midas touching everything and it all turning to gold. But when he touches his daughter and she turns to gold, he realizes that it's hopeless. And having all the money and all the power and everything doesn't make you happy. And I think that's where a lot of the myths kind of reflect that what's it called, that story. And you sort of
Mhm.
think, well, yes, we all know that, but do we? Because we're not doing it. We're just carrying on trying to get as rich as
Repeating
possible.
it over and over again, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
And then
the
we end up
main narrative.
feeling, and then we feel
And
depressed.
to the destruction of the planet and our relationships, all in the pursuit of capital, right? It's the same age-old story.
Yeah, power and
Capital,
power and
yeah.
money that is supposed to make us so happy, and they just don't. And it sounds like such a boring, money won't make you happy. Well, yes, it will.
Yeah,
Yes, it will.
from the top, right? Like this moralistic, yeah, money can't buy happiness. Like,
And
yeah,
you think,
yeah,
oh
we
yeah, yeah, yeah.
can't
Well,
buy me love. We've heard it before, yada yada. But
yeah, you think, oh,
it's
that's so boring. I
obviously
mean,
we're not getting it. So
we're not getting it. But I mean, to be honest, it's nice to have nice things. It's perfect. I'd much rather. I think one of our actors, Michael Caine, said, he said, "I've been rich and I've been poor, and rich is better."
well, certainly, exactly. And who can deny that,
So
being
you don't want to
comfortable.
say, "I don't want anything. I know I want to just live off a pile of beans." No, that's not what it's about. But when that becomes the only goal, it's just going to bring you misery. If you,
Mhm.
so it's about, I suppose it's about, again, the other thing about myth, is about balance. And that's what we're always looking in astrology. We're trying to find balance. We're trying to find ways that planets can complement each other. What we can learn from a difficult transit that might be going on, rather than just saying, oh, I just wish that transit was over. And
Yeah, when
maybe,
is it going to end?
when's it going to end? I mean, that's
Rather
always
than what can I
difficult.
learn? What's the highest thing I can learn from it, from this experience right now? Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to be quite, sort of brutal with clients when they say, but I can't, it's what, 2 years it's going to last? That transit goes on for 2 years? Oh no, that's not. Well, I'm sorry, I can't actually speed the planets up for you. But actually, it does take a long time for this lesson to sink in. And it takes as
Yeah.
long as it takes. Some transits are very quick and you learn quickly, and some take a long time. But it's at the end of that, you suddenly realize, okay, so that transit of Pluto over my sun has actually really taught me something. Unless you just keep railing against it and trying to pretend it's not happening and
Hmm.
distract yourself with, um,
Hubris, and your hubris takes over, and denial, which
yeah,
is such a common theme in all of these myths.
yeah,
The overreach, you
the
know, you
overreach.
can't you can't catch me on the gingerbread man, is what I call it, right? To bring it back to a more folk tale
Well,
myth.
yes, but I mean, I think the folk tales and all those Aesop's fables. I mean, they're as relevant. You could easily write a whole book of Aesop's fables and have the same sort of knowledge, if you like. But I think we've lost touch with that. I think that's my the thing that I'm trying to keep going is, let's not forget about these things. Let's have them as they are, and that's a bit of a problem because a lot of, I think that's why Harry Potter is so. relevant because I don't think J.K. Rowling veered off writing a story that she felt was authentic. Whereas when you've got kind of knockoffs of those stories, they tend to be not, they don't have the actual depth. And that's when you get mythic films. I mean, I think they did one on Troy with Brad Pitt where they actually ignored the gods. They didn't have it. The gods had nothing to do with the whole Trojan War, and
I
it's
mean, you're just, yeah, siphoning out the whole everything, right? Like the desiccating it,
yeah,
right?
it's just
There's
like
no juice.
there's no point. I mean, the whole point was it was a war between the gods, and men were involved, and the men, the gods were playing around with the lives of men, and men were trying to. That's the whole story. But so you have the Battle of Troy with no gods. It's just like, really? Doesn't make any sense. And then people say, oh, well,
Mhm.
that's all just nonsense, isn't it?
Hmm. And
So,
it sucks the magic out of it. I will say, I think it's the perennial fight for the free will versus determinism conundrum, right? Like, and so maybe if we just get rid of the gods and extract them from the myths altogether, then we'll have free will. It'll be confirmation that we have free will.
yeah,
And that is one of the themes in all of these myths, that it very much is there's a question of free will. Like, even though much of the exercise of free will is trying to subvert fate, right? Like, oh, the oracle said my child was going to do this, so I'm going to do everything to try to avoid that. And then so it's very paradoxical in many
it
of
is
these
actually.
myths. What do
Yeah.
you think about that
I mean,
question?
I think it's very interesting because, of course, on the one hand, astrology is all about trying to understand the future. But really, what we should be trying to understand is the present. And that then helps us rather than sort of say, well, when will I get, the people will come and they'll say, will I get married? Will I have children? Will I have a house? Will I change jobs? Well, actually, that all depends on what you do now. Let's look at what's going on this moment for you to see what are your choices, rather than giving it over to fate and saying, am I going to get lucky? um, well, that depends. Are you going to do what you have to do? I mean, it is
Yeah.
interesting.
Are you going to set yourself up,
Yeah,
for the lucky circumstances to manifest? Because if you're not positioning yourself actively to avail yourself of a Jupiter transit, then if you're not leaving the house, then
not going to
no
happen.
Jupiter's bounty is going to rain down on you, right?
Yeah. So I think there's that sort of the gypsy Rose Lee, you will cross water with a dark stranger kind of prophecies. But the oracles, they are very paradoxical because it's almost like if you ask the oracle, what shall I do? They'll tell you almost what you're going to do, not what you should be doing. Um,
And
if you
trying to avoid that, once they're like, oh, then that immediately leads them
sets you
to
off on a whole,
fill the prophecy, right? It sets it all in motion.
yeah, I think that's with Perseus, for example. um, the Acrisius, Danae's father, hears that if his daughter has a son, that he will take his grandfather's life. And so the grandfather shuts her up in a tower, and Zeus visits her as a shower of golden rain, and she gets pregnant. And then he realizes that he's going to have he has a grandson, so he shoves them off in a boat, or in a chest, actually, hoping they'll drown. And then the whole story of Perseus comes around. And then when he's 85 years old, he's at the Olympic Games, and Perseus is there too, and he throws a discus. And the wind catches it, and it goes over and hits the old man on the head, and he dies. So yes, his grandson did
There's
bring about
no,
his.
so it's like there's no escaping the fate, right? Like, so it is very paradoxical. Like, what I'm just like, what's the lesson there? Like, do you try to exercise your free will? Are there just certain aspects of your life that are predetermined that you have to accept? And the more you struggle against it, the more you fulfill that destiny. It's an age-old
It's
existential
an age-old
question.
question, and I suppose there's, you know, sometimes the things that happen to you are, I mean, in a way, who you are at birth is your fate. That's what fates you, because you can't be anybody other than who you are at birth, and what your circumstances are, and what your family inheritance is like. That actually is that's your fate. And then you do with that what you will, and that's your, also your birth chart comes in with that, and that gives you all sorts of um, you know, positives and negatives. If you, is that quite the
Mhm.
right? Maybe that's not quite. But anyway, things that are easy and things that are not so
It's the
easy.
context, right? It's the context into which you're born, like
And
good
you
or
can do,
bad or whatever. It is what it is. It's what you have
yeah,
to work with. Yeah.
and you have that to work with, and you either make the best of it or you make the worst of it. And I think that's in a way, because I mean, Perseus had nothing to do with his grandfather being worried he was going to kill him. He just got born, and that was, you know, because of the act of the grandfather, he got sent off to an island, then he killed the gorgon and all the rest of it. But that was all sort of, it was nothing to do with him. It wasn't, it's like Orestes and Oedipus, it wasn't their fault that they got involved in a family dynamic, but they
Mhm.
did, and then there
But
was
it's a
nothing they could do about it.
perpetuation of, I mean, it's amazing how the myths talk about the perpetuation of generational trauma, right? That is like your choice to resolve individually or not, and if you unconsciously go about your business, more than likely you will perpetuate it. I think that's a lot of the Greek myths is
Yeah.
um, illustrating how that generational trauma gets cascades down through
It,
the into the next.
and I think with some of them, you know, I mean, in the end, Perseus has a pretty good ending. You know, he doesn't, you know, his grandfather was 85, and just because the discus hit him on the head, it was sort of like not that bad. Um, and Orestes finally has to come, you know, he has to suffer for the whole family, the whole cursed house of Atreus. And he ends up going mad and having to really do some serious therapy, if you like. And finally gets, you know, gets cleared and is able to sort of, you know, let go of the family curse. And I guess that's in a way what we're all trying to do, and it is to do with consciousness, it is to do with um, understanding and taking responsibility. And that's such a big
Hmm.
word, consciousness and responsibility for our actions and the consequences. and
Hmm.
and not, I
And
think not.
Orestes, like his that whole episode in that myth where he sort of it is like it stops with me, but yeah, he goes off into the wilderness pursued by the Furies, right? That's the symbolism for his madness in the wilderness
Yeah,
to heal that trauma.
yeah. And he also had to do some bad things because of the circumstances that he was put in. It wasn't his fault that his parents were dreadful, and but he had to choose, and he had to decide which side he was going, because he had it, whatever he did, he was in trouble.
Yeah, it's a
So
catch
he,
22.
sometimes we have to do kind of bad things in order to get through, but it's whether you do them, when you do them consciously. And I think that was the thing. I mean, he consciously took on the role of the father avenger and killed his mother, because otherwise Apollo would have pursued him, so he was going to be pursued one way or the other. But he
Hmm.
decided, because he was a man, he had to do the avenging father bit. But he also knew that he was going to be driven mad by the Furies, who like to go through guilt and um, nightmares and madness. And he went through that whole thing, and then finally came to Athena and said, okay, you have to help me now. And so she helped him. You know, she tried
The
the action
goddess of
of the
wisdom,
gods.
right? Wisdom is
Yeah,
gained after going through that dark night of the soul, very alchemical process, right? And so much of like these myths have that alchemical feeling to them, like purification through this Negredo
mm,
period.
yeah. And I think that's all, that's really what they're really all about. And being able to sort of like in the Hindu medicine god, you meditate on you sort of really get into a myth and really start thinking about it and start thinking about how it applies to your own life, and what were your generational traumas, and can you forgive, and can you overcome, or do you want revenge, and
Yeah,
do you
are
want
you poisoned by your own, yeah, the perpetuating those same wrathful emotions,
yeah.
right? Jennifer asks, she's curious if you have any specific planetary myths that astrologers often oversimplify or get wrong.
Oh my
That's a good
goodness.
question.
Uh, I don't know that I can really I don't really know, to be honest.
I mean, I think that the danger with the popularity of astrology as it is happening on social media channels, it oversimplifies a lot of the myth. And as Jennifer had also pointed out, doesn't we don't get so much of the shadow side of these archetypes, right?
Yeah.
That are so much embedded in everything. So, you know,
Okay, so if we just look at Venus, for example, Venus is the goddess of love and beauty, and so everything Venusian is supposed to be lovely, which on one level it is. But Venus, if you scratch the surface, Venus is very jealous and very vain and very vengeful. In the story of Eros and Psyche, which isn't included in the mythic journey, but in that story, Psyche is a mortal woman who, through no fault of her own, is beautiful, and people start admiring her more than they do Aphrodite, and the men on earth start sort of worshipping or following Psyche around instead of going to Aphrodite's temples, and she gets cross. So she asks her son Eros to go and kill her, which is pretty brutal. Um, and there's the story that there's a wonderful myth of Eros and Psyche. I probably shouldn't tell you that all now. We'll be here all night, but
that's okay.
it's a great story. So look it up.
Tell us
Eros.
a story, Julia.
But it's where Venus, Aphrodite, is very vengeful. She wants revenge. She wants rid of this woman who's more beautiful than her. So there is that side of Venus, which isn't all sweetness and light and love. And I mean, all the planets have their sort of their shadow sides.
And
Um,
I think in the experience too, like it's a very one-dimensional thing to say, oh, these are the benefics, these are the malefics, and Jupiter transits don't always, it just can be a magnification or an expansion. More is not necessarily better. And so there's a nuance, I think, that's
yeah.
frequently lost in a pop astrological view that's promulgated quite
Well, I think
frequently across
I think this is the trouble
social
with
media.
astrology today, is that there's so much of it, and it's so much of it is quite, well, shallow, really, I guess, because if you're not looking at the two sides of all the planets, I mean, you look at Jupiter. I mean, he's a bit of
Quite
a
the philanderer, right? Yeah, he's a
tremendous
handful.
philanderer. I mean, he's an absolute handful. And you've got Hera chasing after him and chasing after his children, and um, you've got lots of stepmothers and step children all fighting in the Greek myths, and then of course Saturn, killing his children, limiting everything. Uranus um, killed his father,
Same thing, the generational cascade, right? Of like
all
the
because of,
same
of the
story.
of the
Yeah.
wish for power, or the wish for everything all to myself, rather than actually sharing and letting things work through their natural cycles. So I think looking at the dark side of each planet is just as useful as looking at the light. Um,
And exploring the myths, even the cross-cultural myths. I know the myth of Inanna is frequently used to describe Venus's astronomical change in her position in the sky. And that's a brutal story of her own sacrifice and, in a way, individuation too, that isn't usually incorporated into people's interpretation
Mm.
of Venus, but I think if you pick that apart and you look at in people's charts whether Venus is an evening star or a morning star, that adds more nuance to the interpretation and the meaning, how Venusian qualities show up in a person's life. So it's examining the myths, even the cross-cultural myths, I think are
Oh,
very important,
definitely.
not just limiting oneself to the Greek myths, which is what astrology is based on. So that's an interesting question too, like how to enrich your interpretations with the cross-cultural
Mm.
myths as well, which I was very glad to see that you were the breadth of the myths that you included in this book.
Mm. Well, we wanted to, I mean, because actually there are so many cross-cultural myths. Obviously, we know the ones that we know best are the ones that we've grown up with or are versed in. But I mean, there are masses of other wonderful stories, from all over the world, and I think it's really important to sort of, to go everywhere and look at all the myths, because actually they've all got the same thread in the end. At the very root of it, what really matters is relationships, people, um, you know, the basic
Compassion. Yeah.
compassion, kindness,
No
um,
hubris. Hubris.
little hubris as possible, because they all they all end badly. Trying to, and also our sort of being able to live our limited lives and not try to sort of, I guess that's also the other thing, acceptance of the fact that we're all limited, that we're all human, and that we're all flawed, deeply flawed, and trying not to find perfection, but trying to find, I guess, compromise is one of the most important things that we can ever try to find, is something so that everybody gets something, but nobody gets it all. Because at
Mhm.
the moment it's all or nothing. Either everybody gets this, and nobody else. It's sort of our culture is very split at the moment, and
Yes,
people are
the
bad or they're good.
polarization is
So, but
apparent,
I mean,
very
somewhere
palpable.
there's a compromise, isn't there? And I think if we're looking for compromise, and it's the same with the planets. You're looking. No planetary aspect is all good or all bad. They've all got their. Um, if you've got masses of trines, it's difficult to get stuff done because there's no
Hmm.
pebble in your shoe.
Hmm. Yeah, there's no friction. You need
Yes.
friction to create fire or action, right?
Yeah.
Impetus.
So I think all those sort of trying to find the stories for, I mean, the Mythic Tarot, the court cards in the Mythic Tarot are very similar to the astrological signs. So the cardinal, fixed, and mutable have all got their sort of correlation with the kings, queens, and knights. The kings are all the cardinal signs who get things done. The queens are the fixed signs that actually manifest it, and the mutable signs
Keep it going.
keep it going, move out, move in, move out, move out of one sign and into another. So they've all got their own little stories. So that's usually, that can also be quite a helpful thing to think about when you're looking at the planetary myths.
Mhm. Indeed. And individuation, too, seems to be such a strong and powerful theme that connects all of these myths, and the onus on the human individual to create meaning in their life for themselves apart from whence they came, or based on whomever, right? Even if the gods dictate something, the humans are still sort of mandated to create their own individual meaning.
I guess to be the best person you can be, given your fate.
Hmm.
Are there
Yep.
more, are there any more questions that?
I was just looking at the a lot of love. Priscilla enjoys our discussion. she appreciates our conversation instead of just giving an overview of the chapters. So thanks, Priscilla. I agree. I want to sink my teeth into it rather than give an overview.
Well,
Juliet,
I guess we're
go
going to
ahead.
have to stop quite soon, but I hope those of you that have read the book have enjoyed it and that you've been able to get something out of it.
I mean, I find that I like to let it just sink in, right? Like it just speaks to a non-rational level.
Mm.
You just internalize the lessons. And my question about like, what is it like to collaborate with Liz Greene? I mean, obviously she's a legendary figure in the astrology world, and you're so lucky to be able to work with her. And who like because the narratives that are very well written and compelling of each myth, sort of the retelling in the style and tone that the book is written in. Um, was there a division of labor? Just as a meta writing level, I'm curious about the construction of the book.
Well, we wrote the various we sort of retold the stories us one, I would find one story and kind of tell it, she'd find another, and then we did it over in those days it was done over telex. There was no internet, so I'd get a vast telex of a whole myth that she'd thought of, and then I'd telex her back a myth, and then we'd talk about it and say, well, should we do this one or that one? I mean, it was so different because we did it in the 90s, and the kind of access to the things that we have now. But basically, we decided what the themes were, the meaning of the myths, and then Liz wrote the commentary, having discussed it. So we talked about what we wanted to say, and then she wrote the commentary so that it had a sense of continuity.
Mhm.
So the different stories are told in our styles, and sometimes more biblical if they came from the Bible. So we it was very much a collaboration, and it was just very much fun because we would say, what about this story? Hey, how about that one? And it was the most enjoyable um, sort of fun thing to do.
The
So,
gods were compelling you, huh?
well,
Like, give us
we
our
said
due.
with the Mythic Tarot and with the Mythic Journey that we didn't really write them; they just got written. They kind of
Mhm.
somebody wanted them to be written, and so we wrote them something somewhere. I don't know. It was a very, and I think it was very authentic. It was just genuinely what we both really really believe. Um, we didn't really wrote them because we really wanted to, not because we had to or because we thought we might make some money at it. It wasn't that at all. It was a labor of love, actually, to be honest.
Mhm. Giving voice, yeah, to the myths that
Yeah.
need to be heard. Obviously, humanity needs myth badly.
Well, fortunately, that's it went out of print at a certain moment, and then Margaret from Wessex Astrologer brought it back into print just now, which is why I guess we're talking about it today.
Mhm.
It
And
was a picture book before, it had pictures and everything, but I think it was just too
okay.
expensive to be produced in color and everything. So that's why it went out of print eventually. So
Mhm.
it's printed again without the pictures.
Fantastic. It's a beautiful book. I've really enjoyed reading it. Thank you. And I wanted to end also our consulting skills class that we offer in the winter term. It uses another book that you wrote with Liz, The Astrologer,
To the
Priest.
counselor and the priest, yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
Where again quite a lot of mythology comes into it. And the other one that's another CPA seminar that I did was the family inheritance, which is about the myths of the fourth and 10th house in the family inheritance, what you bring in and from, mother, father, and some of those myths. So yes, it because that was the CPA's Center for Psychological Astrology. That was what we did. And that was lots of what we taught all through the 90s in Regent's College in London.
Fantastic. It's such a an amazing gift to the astrological community. I think your wisdom to be able to make these myths relevant to astrology, and astrologers everywhere should acquaint themselves with these myths and to
Well,
get
I
the
hope
practice.
everybody will really enjoy them because they're such fun. They're just
They
a lot.
really are. Yeah. And every story, every modern story is sort of a riff on one of these myths, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah. You can keep finding them all over the place. You'll find how they've sort of. I mean, even Red Riding Hood is more or less is the story of Persephone and Hades. Red Riding Hood goes off picking flowers and gets seduced by a wolf and ends up in the underworld. So you can actually sort of see that fairy tale having been taken out of that very dark myth.
yeah, it's amazing. It just speaks to the existential truths that are threaded throughout humanity's experience. They're
I think we
enduring
have,
and
we have the
universal.
gift of imagination, and the more we can use it, the better we'll be, especially as AI keeps snapping at our heels. AI
Yeah,
only.
AI seems to be collapsing everything into this one-dimensional experience. I'm very skeptical of it enriching our lives rather than desiccating it once again,
Well,
and
I
just
think
being plain wrong, frequently wrong, especially about astrology.
yeah. Well, I think that's why we have to kind of stay live and stay imaginative, not just ask chat GBT or whatever to give us answers, to actually come
Yeah,
up
it's a
with
very seductive, to be like, oh, I'll just ask, this thing to spit out, but it is an atrophying experience. I worry about, if you use it or lose it.
yeah.
Human function capacity to imagine it and creativity, if it's not used and it's offshored to this
And to
mechanism.
who? We don't know who. I think there's a wonderful line in the Harry Potter that J.K. Rowling says about something of never trust anything you can't see if you don't know where it keeps its brain. I mean, we don't know which brain AI has taken some bit from. We at least if you're facing another human being, you can sort of eyeball them and see what they're, who they are and where they are coming from. Whereas AI, it could be who knows who's behind it.
Who's pulling the strings, right? Who's the man
Wizard of
behind the
Oz is
curtain?
another wonderful
Really?
image for
Yeah.
that. So, I think we have to stay true to our own humanity. That's perhaps the most important thing. And being human is being flawed. And,
And
all,
accepting that,
and accepting.
not that striving for perfection. I think that's where the hubris comes from. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, whether it's Icarus or Bellerophon or whomever, it's I can be a god, right? Like, and not even questioning that motivation is flawed or not gonna go good, will not end well.
Oh,
And we're living
definitely.
that right now.
We certainly are.
Well, thank you so much, Juliet. This has been an amazing conversation, and people are very thankful in the chat. I'm very happy that we were able to do this.
Well,
And
thank you for inviting me. It's been
Jeannie
fun.
says that when people ask me where to start learning astrology, I always tell them to start with a mythology.
Yeah,
And I think that that is an excellent bit of advice, Jeannie, and I agree. And Juliet would agree with you too, I
definitely
would
would.
imagine. So I encourage everyone to read The Mythic Journey if you haven't already. It's a wonderful book, and I look forward to the next time, Juliet.
Lovely. Thank you very much.